we talked about Nelson Cruz. I mean, Nelson Cruz has been doing it for a long time now, Hall of Fame or not. That guy hits like 40 home runs every year. But gosh, hitting 40 home runs a year for 15 years gets you into another stratosphere.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's interesting that you do bring up Nelson Cruz, because I do want to hit on him, and he kind of, the conversation gets further than Miguel Cabrera. But for the time being, I just want to, linger on Miguel Cabrera and just, what he's got 2 MVPs. He won them in back-to-back years in 2012 and 13, where he literally swung the Detroit Tigers into World Series contention, during those early 2010s. So it was a lot of fun to watch him do that. But then you brought up him doing it in Detroit, not a huge market, but a huge ballpark. Comerica Park is not a place that is conducive for a guy that's going to go out there and go for a home run title or go for, 500 home runs. So the fact that he's been able to adapt his swing, use the opposite field a little bit more, and get to that 500 home run plateau. Maybe it's kind of ironic that he does get the 500th home run on the road away from Comerica Park, but at the same time, he's still been driving in a boatload of RBIs, and he might be the last guy that we see win a Triple Crown, because he did do that when he won the MVP in 2012. He was first in batting average, first in home runs, first in RBIs, and those are the traditional numbers that everybody looks at to be as far as greatness. And he won the Triple Crown, and he won the MVP that year, where he beat out Mike Trout, who had more maybe non-traditional numbers. So I always found that fascinating. But you bring up Nelson Cruz. So if you go down the list of home run hitters and who might be the next to get to that 500 plateau, you have Miguel Cabrera. The next closest guy is your guy, Nelson Cruz. But he's at 443, and he's 41 years old. Does he have enough to get to that 500 plateau? I don't think he does, just because of the age and, the treachery of going through 162 games and trying to hit that many home runs. It's really kind of a fascinating thing to think about, that Miguel Cabrera, for a little while, might be one of the last guys that we see at that 500 home run plateau. But it's also the career arc. A lot of these guys get their home runs early, whereas Nelson Cruz kind of showed up. He was a late bloomer, man. He's gotten a lot of these home runs in the last 10 years.
Yeah, that's a great point. I didn't even know that when I brought him up, but I think it's funny because the 300 wins for pitchers, that went by the wayside, many years ago, right?
Great call.
You had, Cy Young at 5'11", and then 300 was the Hall of Fame marker. And now I think you're going to be closer to like 200 just because of the specialization, right? We have relief pitchers. I mean, gosh, I used to watch the Yankees growing up because I lived on the East Coast. But Goose Gossage, I mean, I think I've mentioned that before. They would bring him in at like the 7th inning, with one out in the 7th inning.
Old school.
Yeah, and he'd get 8 outs. He'd get 7 or 8 outs, and he just loved. I mean, that was a closer, right? But and then the starter would obviously get the win if he had Goose following you up. So Ron Guidry got a lot of tip of the cap to Goose Gossage.
True.
But my point is that I think the specialization makes that number go down, and I think you're right on, Blummer. I mean, 500 home runs is this plateau that is maybe a thing of the a bygone era. I mean, unless you can get some of these guys to the longevity, because of the same reason that pitching wins go down, the specialization. I mean, you're facing a bunch of different guys at a bunch of different times in the games, and I think that
pitchers are getting better. You're right.
That's right. But the fact that Miguel has been able to do it in this era, I mean, Nelson, if he plays, maybe Nelson goes off, let's say he hits 15 home runs before the end of this year. That gets him there. He's got to have a big year next year. He could do it in a year and a half. No, I'm kidding. He needs another 2. Yeah, he needs another 2 years, right, to get to 500. But he's kind of the last guy to have a chance for that. I mean, and then, maybe somebody like Trout, right? The superstar still may get a chance. Right, Trout could be in that realm if he stays healthy.
There's a great article on Fox Sports, and they said who's next to reach 500, and they actually have a list of about 20 guys. I'm not going to go through all of them, but Mike Trout's at the top of the list, like Tuttle is talking about, and they put their age and the home runs they're at. So Mike Trout, at the age of 30, has 310 home runs, and at the pace he is on and he's been able to be consistent at, I think that he might be a guy, for 190 home runs, in his next 10 years, might be able to pull that off, only being 19 home runs a year. Bryce Harper and Giancarlo Stanton are next, Bryce Harper's 29, has 255 home runs in a very home run friendly ballpark. Giancarlo Stanton has 332 home runs at the age of 32. But how about some of these youngsters? Juan Soto, 23, 89 home runs. Vlad Jr., 23, 60 home runs. He's got some work to do. But the one that jumped at me was Ronald Acuna Jr. He is 24 years old and has 105 home runs. So just mark this podcast and mark those names and keep an eye on those guys, because those are guys who are off to electric starts, much like Miguel Cabrera.
Wouldn't it be really interesting, though, to read your own press and you're like, yeah, I have 69 home runs. I'm 23 years old. I'll get to the 500 club. I mean, that's a big stretch in any of those articles,
looking at that?
Right? Like,
wow.
You're like, what the hell are they talking about? 500 home runs? I haven't even hit 100 yet. Like,
that is eternity away.
I would just bury that article somewhere else. I mean, even Nelson Cruz is probably like 500 home runs. Shit, I gotta play. Like 2 more years.
You would
I don't
think
know if
Nelson has the realization of like how hard he's worked just to get to 443 right now.
Exactly. So anyway, I think that obviously that article sounds a lot more like who are the superstars on the rise, but I think it's going to be few and far between, which I think was your entire point. Miguel Cabrera could be one of the last guys that we see in the next 10 years that gets to 500 home runs, and it could even be longer still to see a pitcher obviously get to 300 wins or something like that. So the game has changed. The numbers, as we talked about Joey Votto, some of those metrics should change along with it, and we'll still figure out who the Hall of Famers are. The good old eyeball test, right? There's analytics and eyeball test. I mean, Yadi Molina, we talked about him already. I think he's a Hall of Famer. Albert Pujols, Hall of Famer. But we'll see how it changes and evolves, and we'll keep talking about it here on the Bleacher Blums podcast for sure.
Absolutely, and I love the idea of milestones, because it's good that current fans are seeing some of these milestones be hit, because like Tuttle is saying, you don't know if they're ever going to be hit again with the way the game is being played.
So if you like the video, give it a thumbs up, subscribe, and hit the bell so you can get notified when we post new videos.